presentation is part of our ongoing seminar on innovative education, designing models of work. And Howard Fuller is with us, who is the Director of Human Services at Milwaukee County. He served as Dean of General Education at the Milwaukee Area Technical College. He was a member of the cabinet of Governor Tony Earl a few years ago. He recently testified in Congress in Washington on human services issues. We consider Howard one of the most experienced and insightful people from the minority communities in our area who will be talking with us about education as it relates to minorities in a changing, restructuring economy.
What I want to try to do is this whole thing about the thing that Belden sent me, or one of the phone messages I got, was to sort of talk about how we would go about bringing African Americans in Milwaukee into the economy. And obviously that relates a lot to what's happening in education, but I think it relates a lot to some other things. And so what I want to try to do, because the whole issue like economics and all that is not necessarily my strong suit, but I think I know enough about it to sort of mumble through what I'm supposed to tell you about. But really to set sort of a context for a discussion, you know, that I hope that you all will have questions and stuff. But I want to share some data with you, some of which you may be familiar with, and some of which you may not. And then on the basis of that, try to begin to talk about, fine, now what do we do about this? And to be very honest with you, I'm not sure I know totally what we need to do. I mean, I have some ideas, and I'd be glad to share them with you, but there are a lot of things that, quite frankly, I just don't know. And unfortunately, I don't think that there's a lot of people who know. But if they do know, they keep them secret from everybody else. So let me start with some of this information. If it gets confusing, at any point, just stop me at any point. Okay. What we want to talk about is if we use 1988 data based on some of the estimates of the growth rate from 1980 to 85, we would come up with an African American population in Milwaukee County of roughly 175,000. Now, whenever we talk about a figure for Milwaukee County, that's sort of a euphemism for Milwaukee, because there are relatively few African Americans who live outside of the city of Milwaukee, in Milwaukee. Clearly there are more than there were 10 years ago, but in absolute numbers, it's relatively few. And I used to know how many there was, but I forgot. But so we're talking about roughly 175,000 people. According to the 1988 Wisconsin income maintenance data, and this will be from the Department of Health and Social Services for the state, they said that approximately 82,406 people of African American descent were either receiving benefits through AFDC, food stamps, or medical assistance. And this is an unduplicated count. So what we're saying is that in Milwaukee County, approximately, what is that, about 50, not quite 15% of all of the black people in Milwaukee are on some form of public assistance. Okay. Now, to me, that's an astounding statement, when you start looking at the reality of economic condition. But let's go further. There were approximately 4,470 people on general assistance. on GA. And there was an average of about 8,000 black people who received unemployment compensation at some point in time during 1988. Then we went to look at Social Security payments, and there were 19,341 black people who got Social Security payments. So if you take an unduplicated count of income maintenance, GA, unemployment comp, and Social Security, you come in the neighborhood of about or somewhere close to 2/3 of all of the African American people in Milwaukee County either got some income maintenance, which would be, either these three: general assistance, unemployment comp, or Social Security. Now, when I first saw this, it took me a while to grasp what this means. Okay, I mean, you see it, but then you got to really sit down and say, what are the implications of this? Well, obviously, there are tremendous implications, particularly if you believe that true freedom in this society, based on how our society is functioning, is tied up with a person's ability to attain relative economic independence. And if that's true, and I think it is, then the real question becomes, what is really the nature of this population's ability to really function in a way that I assume most American people are supposed to function? Okay, if you've got this kind of data, in terms of Belden's thing to me about how do you get folks into the economy, I want to go at it another way and say that given this data, even if we didn't have this data, a real crucial question that people are arguing about now is people are arguing about welfare. Right? And most of the people arguing about it are the people who pay for it. And they don't want to pay for it. Okay. And that's not a new argument. It just, at different periods, it rolls around again with different levels of intensity. And I think all of us would say that that level of intensity reflects what's happening in the economy. At least historically, I think that's happening. So that we have an ongoing argument about welfare. I believe that the welfare system is not a system that can be reformed. That really it has to be destroyed. There's no other system that I know of in this country that is more hated than this system. And as this guy, David Ellwood, wrote in his book, I'll think of the name of it in a minute, that if you talk to people, he used an example of the Oprah Winfrey Show. And on the Oprah Winfrey Show, they were going to discuss welfare. And they had a woman there who was on welfare, and they had a woman there who was a taxpayer. And both of these women were screaming at each other about how terrible this is. So the people who pay for it hate it, and the people who own it hate it. Now they hate it for different reasons, but they both hate it. So at some point in time, somebody's got to ask, how long can you keep a program going that everybody hates? Okay, that's a question. But after you ask that question, then you say, what do you do about it? And of course, what most people say is, tell them to get jobs. That's what they ought to do, like all the rest of us. Now, I want to postulate that in fact we're having the wrong discussion, because the discussion really ought to be about poverty. Because the fact of the matter is that most of the people who are poor in America today are not on welfare. I would suggest to you that they are working. So the real question becomes, can you ever resolve the problems of welfare without dealing with the problem of the working poor? Now, why do I say that? I say that because how do you explain that we have people who doing everything that you're supposed to do in America? They're getting up every day and they're going to work. But their work, because of tremendous changes in our economy, does not allow them to make a wage or a salary or whatever it is enough to lift themselves and their families out of poverty. So then the question is, if the work ethic is an important value for Americans, does it have an intrinsic value in and of itself, or does it have a related purpose that makes that value real? And that related purpose is to be able to make a better life for yourself and your family. In other words, can we only say that a work ethic is valuable to us as a value or as a norm or whatever you want to call it, simply because there's an intrinsic thing about working? I believe that there is an intrinsic thing about working, but that the dominant thing is that by working, you're able to, in fact, make a better life for yourself and your family. At some point, I think that construct has to be considered. If that's true, then we come back to why I think we have to wrestle with this, and that is, and I use this example, and pretty soon I have to come up with another one because everybody have heard it, but if you go to a bank in the inner city on the First of the month, okay, or I mean, like pick one like Capitol Court. There's an interesting thing happening in the bank. There's also an interesting thing happening outside of the bank in terms of who's outside and who's inside. Who's outside are the largest number of African American males that you see collected in any one place. And that's significant, especially in a male-dominated society, which is a whole other discussion. But inside the bank, there are women and children. The women who are on welfare take their check and they give it to a woman who is a teller. The woman who is a teller is working, but her check is probably less than, or certainly not much more than, the check of the women who are walking into the bank to get it cashed. Not only that, but the woman teller knows that a part of her earnings is going into the check for this woman who is not working. On top of it, the woman who's a teller also probably has kids, and she had to get up, find childcare for her children, pay for it, unless she's lucky enough to have a grandmother or an aunt or a cousin or whatever. She's got to find it, she's got to pay for it, she's got to get the child there, plus she's got to be to work. There's a good chance if she has any health insurance at all, it may not be the best health insurance to meet all the needs of her family. But here's a woman who's not working at all, who has child care and health insurance. Now you explain to me how we're ever going to attack this without attacking this. I don't know how any intelligent an honest person could ever say that. So what it means is that all of our talk about reform and welfare and putting people to work is smoke and mirrors. Until we get to this and this. Because to tell somebody to go get a job, and there are going to be exceptions. There are going to be the people that we will parade out as national examples of why putting people to work works. Okay. And you're going to find exceptional women and exceptional men who break through all of this crap and get and quote make it in America. These are exceptional people. There are exceptional people within this population who are doing the best that they can do, raising kids under the worst of circumstances, but they never get any credit. There are exceptional people in here who are doing things that many of us who talking about all of this stuff couldn't do in a minute, couldn't possibly do what some of these people are doing in almost heroic proportions in this country. So my point for all of this is that when you look at a place like Milwaukee and you look at the statistics that I gave you, and if any of this is true, then we've got a major, major problem in front of us. And it is best played out, I think, irrespective of what you think about the county executive, is best played out in this budget. I mean, you can see it most clearly in this budget, because what's happening is there is a growing number of people who need services and can't pay for them. And there's a shrinking number of people who are paying for these services. And I want to be very clear. I do not say that all the people who come out on this stuff are racist and all of this. Some are. A lot of people are not. There are a lot of people in our county who are frightened. They're frightened by things that they see that seem to be totally outside of the ability of any of us to control it or to find answers to. And that if you've got people who are living on fixed incomes, and there are many people like that in our county, and you continue to talk about property tax increases, you're ultimately going to have the rebellion that you see. But the other side of it is, it's an interesting rebellion because people are coming forward saying, I want to keep this, and this. And so what we get into is the same discussion that we had under the English poor laws, and that is the discussion about the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. Okay, I mean, it's stripped of all of the rhetoric, that's how far we've come since the English poor laws. Except they're now called those people and the rest of us. But they play out in the same way. Given all of this, how are we going to attack these problems? Through the unless we find a way to create jobs, and jobs that in fact pay people a living wage, or there's going to have to be some combination of jobs and whatever, whether it's, I don't know what they call it, negative tax credits, stuff like what Tom Petri is talking about. So that in fact, you are sure that anybody who's working will be above a poverty wage. Okay. To me, that's the only direction that we can go in that will make any sense, because I don't understand how anything else is going to work in any long-term way. So let me shut up and ask a question.
Several years ago, I heard Thomas Sowell, you know who he is?
Yeah, I know he is.
Okay. He said the worst complication is the government paying people to have babies, and the reason why the huge number of people needing more and more services is getting so much worse so fast is that this destructive incentive And we have in Milwaukee, don't we, the largest population of children having children, and I don't know what to do about that either. You look at it in theory, a lot of people can say, okay, cut them off after the first one, or after the second one, they get no more welfare, they make that one check. Well, in the first place, everybody knows, then these first two little illegitimate children are going to suffer. If the mother has a third, and the same check has to go.
No, there's another option. See, what is the other option? The other option is you take their children.
That's all right with me from what I've seen.
No, but I'm saying once we say that's all right, we got to understand what that means. Okay. I mean, because see, what I'm saying is right. I mean, it's like what then, and understand me. I'm not past having this as a serious discussion. Okay, because I think, quite honestly, to even begin to deal with this problem that we're talking about, we're going to have to do something that's so radical and so almost incomprehensible to us as we exist today. Or there's no way that I can think of that you're going to cut this off. And we're talking about a generational issue. Okay, we're not talking about a problem that is going to be solved in one generation. And we're only going to begin to take steps to solve it, it seems to me, if we can both attack this issue and then be prepared to do something that is extremely radical within the context of our value system, particularly as it relates to families. Okay. And see, the reason why I raise that, I've had this discussion with people who say, okay, we are not going to pay for the second baby, or the third, or the fourth. We can say, okay, you had one mistake, and we can understand, we don't like it, but when number 2 and 3 and 4 comes along, we're not accepting that. Then what does that mean? Either what you're going to do, and this is, I mean, I'm just saying, either what you're going to do is you're going to say, as soon as you have that first one, we're going to, in essence, tie your tubes or do whatever and make sure you can't have another one.
Not in America.
Okay, so all right, we rule that out. Then the question is then, what we going to do when you have the next one? And what we can say is we will not pay for him or her. Then given our value system, since normally we don't let children starve, although given what's happening in child abuse and neglect, I don't even know about that anymore. Normally we don't, or those of us who are thinking wouldn't. So you'd have to pull the kid. And then what it puts us in is, for some period of time, the government is going to take over the raising of those children.
Actually, it's gotten so cold-blooded. I used to sit on the county review, board of review for the children that were being taken out of their homes, and I couldn't believe my ears. Some other new members of the board could. We heard social workers sitting there saying about badly abused children burned and what you know about it. Okay, we can't take that child out of the home. My God, they lose their welfare check, and you know they turn to crime. You know that the child be the victim so that person doesn't lose their check? They might become a criminal. It's that far that the social workers will let the child be the punching bag to keep the check in the house.
I mean, I'm a witness. I mean, I've been through this argument. I mean, just trying to establish a reception center. Okay, and I mean, I just have to say this. I think that those of us who sit around here and think that the foster care system is going to continue to be able to respond to the volume and the severity of what we're facing, we are living in a world of illusions. See, one of the interesting things that has happened as I've tried to look at this stuff over the last 10 years is that the people who once were looked to in this society to provide leadership, particularly those who were elected officials and whatever, there was a whole sense of public service, and there was at some point an issue about courage and this and that. When you look around today, what we, for the most part, have are elected officials who are frightened, and as a result, don't take leadership on issues, don't have a sense of responsibility to educate the population about what is or is not happening. What we have are more and more people who simply want to find where is the safest spot to be. And that's where you will find me. So if 1,000 people come out and scream and holler and whatever, I will use that as a basis to cut this, cut that, even though I know, as I'm sitting there doing it, that the implications of this are going to be profound. So there's no way that we're dealing with intelligent, thoughtful people here, okay, who know that when you sit up, for example, and say, we're going to cut $20 million out of something, that something is not going to get done. I mean, now, we can all argue whether or not it ought to be done, whether or not it's too expensive, but those are cuts around the edges. When you start going at large amounts of cuts, then what we're saying is we are prepared as a society to pay for what we're not paying for now. We're prepared to pay for it in real difficult ways later on. But I really honestly don't think that many of us who are saying all of this stuff understand all of those implications down the road. But a lot of those of us who are elected public officials or bureaucrats or whatever, we know. But that we've been intimidated into silence because it is unpopular to come out and say, this is what you're doing, and this is what the implications of this are going to be. And so I guess to me, we're not ever going to get to radical solutions until we can even get to the point that we're prepared to tell people what it really is. Now, any politician would argue with me and say, that's nice, Howard, but Mondale tried to tell people, you know, I mean, whether you like Dave or not, Dave has tried to come out and say, hey, look, these are problems that I see. Okay, I don't know how we're going to deal with them. Here's my thought on it. Here's what I think it really means. And he's got blasted to hell. When do you think the next time is going to be that someone is going to step forward and do that? Okay? So that's what worries me about a dependence upon, and I don't mean, and I want to be very clear, I'm not criticizing any individual supervisor because I understand the pressures that they're under. I'm simply saying that, just like that Newsweek article, it was a cover story that said, "Is government dead?" Mm-hmm. And what it did was it talked about what the impact of the Reagan Revolution has been on how people view government. And so here we are at a point in our history when, like it or not, we need government to step forward, not just as government, but government in partnership with private sector. But there's got to be a leadership that probably only government can provide. And at this very point in history, we have moved to the point where that's the last thing in the world those are the people who we elect are willing to do. Now, in a scenario like that, a couple of things can happen. Number one, somebody can ride in, as I've heard my boss say, on a white horse with a real simplistic answer. Okay? right, a real, right, read my lips, you know, or get government off the backs of the people. And then it's not a long stretch to something more dramatic than that even, that further polarizes a situation in this country. Because just think about this for a minute. Now, I know it's a little bit off, and I'm trying to set a context for why I don't know that there's even a avenue to discuss what we're really going to do. I can remember when I was in college, vaguely hearing about the Great Depression. And as I got out and began to study myself and learn and realize what's happening here, I began to read and read and read, and I saw all of these pictures of people in bread lines and all of this, okay? This is in the Great Depression. I walk out of the courthouse. Now I won't be able to do that because we're going to build that jail there. But if you walk out into that parking lot the way it used to be, you could look right across the street any evening, and what you see are the line of people lining up to go to St. Ben's for food. Okay? I go to give a speech for emergency pantry workers in Milwaukee. I walk into a room that had somewhere between 250 to 300 people who are volunteer workers in food pantries in Milwaukee. Now, I'm saying to myself, my God, you know, isn't this what had happened in the Great Depression? We had these long lines of people. But what someone reminded me, no, Howard, what you have to understand here is everybody ain't going through this. See, at least in theory, the Great Depression, at least as they explained it to me, hit across the whole spectrum of our society, other than the super rich, I guess, whatever. The argument that people were making to me is those people that you see today are what Harrington tried to wake us up about way back when he started talking about the invisible poor. Once again, what we now have are the invisible poor. And we've given them a name, underclass, you know, for one set of them, there's some other names. But in reality, the song that people are singing nationally is, we're doing better than we've ever done before. Sure, there's some of us who are out of it, but look at the prosperity, look at the growth of the economy, look at all of these things. Yet I keep looking at and see these long lines of people that's getting longer. I'm beginning to see more and more children who are in homeless shelters. But yet the line that I'm getting is, we've done more than any other, at any other point to increase jobs, to broaden the economy and whatever. And I keep saying to myself, has anyone gone down to those folks at St. Ben's and told them how well we're doing? And I guess, Bill, what I'm seeing is, and what this budget told me is, once again, there is no social movement that has any political muscle that speaks for these folks. And so as a result, the situation worsens each day. And the radical solutions that I would think would be a positive force seem to me to be further and further away. But what may be closer is a radical solution that will be a negative force.
Such as?
You know, I mean, suppose someone comes along and says, what we really need to do is round all of these folks up who are on drugs and who are doing all of this, and we need to put them on an empty reservation, military base. You say, oh, no, they won't do that. Okay, well, then suppose I say, we're going to build enough jails to get all of them off the street. Okay, Now the question is, who's going to be in these jails that we're getting ready to build? I don't think the people who will be in these jails are the people who are really making a killing off of these drugs. I don't believe that. I mean, so yeah, we're gonna get some, small time sellers. Are we gonna start rounding up mothers who are addicted to drugs? Are they gonna be the ones? What are we gonna do about them? Since we're not gonna provide enough money for treatment to actually treat people and then provide jobs that provides the ability to sustain life, what are we going to do with all these people? And I'm afraid somebody's going to come along and say, we need to round them up and get them off of our streets because they're contaminating the rest of us. Because people hear no other solution that makes any sense, that sounds like a reasonable solution for people who are frightened of what may happen to them as people and what it is they see happening to, quote, our country. And so ultimately, those of us who argue that you got to begin to see this drug problem as a public health problem, I'm not arguing that we should not deal harshly with dealers. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you could take them out and shoot them. Okay, I mean, just so I can be blunt, I mean, these people are dealing with death every day, okay? But people who are addicted, these people are sick. And until we begin to deal with them in that way, we are not going to make an appreciable difference in the magnitude of this problem. And the last point, you all said, do you ever give short answers? No. I get one more part to this. Ellen Goodman's article, where she raised questions about whether or not we should use the war terminology. Based on the notion that what the war terminology does is sets up good guys and bad guys. And the good guys are those of us who do not use drugs. The bad guys are all those others, okay? So now what we've done is to set up a war between the good guys and the bad guys. Except who are these bad guys? A lot of these bad guys are our children. They are the mothers that we've talked about. They are fathers. They are people who could be productive members of our society who, for any number of reasons, have gotten addicted to drugs. We've now put them in the category of the bad guys. Okay? I mean, it was an interesting thing. I hadn't really looked at it, and it was really helpful for me to read it and understand it because it began to hit home what the long-term implications of that type of terminology and what it is we've set up, okay? And that's the kind of thing that Bennett comes in on because he's able to say, we're simply not going to stand for this, you know, and we've got to stop it, and we've got to stop it now. We've got to say it, no uncertain terms, da-da-da-da-da-da, and a part of that is true. But it's taken place within a context of a good guy, bad guy scenario. It's taken place within the context of unbalanced expenditures towards the jail side. And it's a simplistic notion of what the treatment has to be. I agree with you that what we have to do is we have to provide training. I think that it is possible for people to be trained, but our methods of educating adults has to change. Because most of us who are trained as teachers are trained to teach children. Okay? And we approach the teaching of adults in the same way that we approach the teaching of children. which means we don't take advantage of those adults' life experience and knowledge base and et cetera to build on to get them to where we want them to go. Now, I understand that life experience don't help you do math, but I've been over at MATC enough, and I've had women, mothers come into my office crying at night because they're down there at night trying to learn math and stuff when throughout their whole life what school has been for them is a total turnoff, and they've been beaten down by this school system telling them that they could not learn this, and now here they are 28, 29, 30 years old, 4 or 5 kids down there trying to learn math so that they can get a job. There's got to be a way for us to learn how to educate those people. I believe that while people are in some of this type of treatment, that this education becomes a core part of what is going to give their life meaning. But that we can't be constrained by the way that we have developed our educational bureaucracies so that we will force people to come through what we have set up, as opposed to us being willing to adjust what we have set up to deal with the population that is to be educated. Now, we're not going to get all of these people, okay? But I think we can get a lot more than what we're getting. But our institutions and our approaches are going to have to change. You see something like work experience and job training, I think there's a view that we got to get these people working. I think what it skips is all of this. But let's assume for a moment that we're going to try to use those programs the best that we can to create jobs, you know, for women who are coming into the programs. What I've been arguing is, look, we better start setting up a drug treatment program to run concurrent with this and treat it almost like an employee assistance program, because if we don't, what's going to happen is a number of these women are going to start missing training, missing this, missing that. What we're going to say is you're out, without trying to understand why it is that they're missing these. And so some of these training programs have to run concurrently with the treatment programs. There has to be an interrelationship of the two. If you go over to MATC right now, today, and I am a strong supporter of MATC, because I think for a lot of people, MATC represents the last hope. Okay? If you go over there today, if you go into the C building, it's almost all black. You go into the T building, it's almost all white. The jobs, most of the jobs that would even put you on a track to get above a poverty wage that is not tied into 4 years of college is in the T building. Okay? So what you have is a scenario where a newspaper article comes out and says, we have jobs for, I think it was for lathe operators. And we pay anywhere from $15 to $19 an hour. And we got 15 openings right now. Okay. How do you match the human capital that we have with those openings? If we can't figure out how to do it over at MATC, how's it going to be done? And the weakness of my thing is, how do you take someone who is 31, 32, 33, who has never learned the fundamentals of math, and bring their math level up to the point where they can, in fact, do the things that are necessary to do those jobs in a competent fashion?
Howard, let's just build on that. Now, you know that last year AT&T spent $500 million on education because it said the educational establishment wasn't doing the job. You know that last fall, you had articles like this that came out in business magazines. So we know that you've had a lot of contact with business. Now, do you see any interest now, on the, okay, we kind of saying that politicians, you know, are not doing much now. What about business? Do you see any hope that, any leadership coming out of business? Partly by the fact that demographics indicate that by the turn of the century, another 10 years, half of the new labor force are going to be minorities. So they have a vested interest.
See, Bill, I think that there's an interest. I have to admit, though, still in Milwaukee, I think we are still essentially tinkering around at the edges. Because once you step up to this educational bureaucracy, it's almost like stepping up the mind. And when you step up there and look at what you would really have to do to radically alter what's going on, hey, I mean, a lot of people flinch and step back just because of how entrenched how we do stuff really is. What's the most important thing is not those of us who work in the system. This system is not the most important thing. The most important thing are the people that this system is supposed to serve.
That's outright heresy. When
Right.
I joined the county, they said, remember, a bureaucracy serves itself before its population.
Right. And I'm saying that I understand that. And I'm saying that if you start with the real power has to ultimately be with the people who are to be served. Then what you say is, what is the best way to serve them? And if we say the best way to serve them is this way, then we should be willing to be competitive with some people who say, no, the best way to serve them is through a smaller, more flexible agency or whatever it is. And I say, let's try it and let's see which one better serves the population. And so if it means that we have to give up some of what we've got to make for a better system, then we ought to do it, because what you really want to do, it seems to me, is to put the power to make choices in the hands of the people who are being served, and the more options you can give those people, the better the possibilities are that they're going to be served better. It's the same argument, Bill, that I think that I have consistently made about the schools. I would make about this same, I think the same general principles apply to this. Okay, and it's only through that it seems to me that we're actually going to begin to develop more innovative ways of serving the people that we're trying to serve with the limited resources that we're trying to serve them with. So, I mean, I still believe that that's the way to go, and whether it happens or not, I'm going to say it, and I'm not going to like come in short of what I really think you'd have to do to make this a more rational system for the people to be served, and really ultimately for the people who are paying for it. Because there's so much waste and duplication and whatever that goes on day after day after day with an irrational system, where the bureaucracy itself wields the power and not the people who are to be served.
My guess is if anybody can change it, it'll be you. You've been talking about 2 hours. You know that?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I should stop.
So maybe we ought to thank Howard for being with us. And after a long day, and each year he comes in, it's just a lot of power, and it's power because it's real human, and you're really close to what's out there, and you know that everybody in this room, and I'm sure everybody we represent, is absolutely agrees with you 100%. But what has to be done? The question is how to.
Yeah, how do we do it?
Steps.
How do we do it? You know, it's like a thing. I do probably should get out of it. It's like, you know, I talk about all this stuff all the time. Whenever I get an opportunity, like in classes and stuff like that, And while I'm going to keep working on all of these things as hard as I possibly can, I also think, and this is going to sound like a contradiction, and maybe it is, I also think we have to do some of the little stuff, you know, like for kids who are doing well, to encourage them, you know. I mean, I know we got to deal with kids who have problems, but we have to stop at some point and make sure that we say something to the kids who are doing all of the stuff that we tell them to do, and they get no play because they ain't breaking anybody's windows or they ain't on drugs or whatever it is. And so in very constructive ways, we got to keep encouraging those kids. We got to keep encouraging the kids who are having problems but are trying to get out of it. We've got to figure out ways to support them. I would say the same thing about families, because although it may not sound like it, I still believe that the development of strong families, however those families get defined, are still the key institution that is like the foundation of what it is that we have to do as a society. And although I might argue that we may have to do some things that are real radical, that seem to be anti-family in the first instance, I would argue that it will be necessary to get back to the type of family that we're talking about in the final analysis. In other words, it's like you do something that is in total contradiction to get to a point that is really consistent with what it is that you want to say. And so while it sounds like, you know, I'm pulling away from fundamental tenets, I'm trying to figure out how do we get from a situation that we have today back to some of those fundamental tenets, although they should never be exactly the same as they were in the old days, because these ain't the old days. But there are aspects of it, though, that remain important. And so the question is, how do we get back to those from where we are today? And so even when we may be talking about what seems like real radical departures, I guess I want to argue that for me, those departures are necessary to get back to some of these more fundamental points. And that all of us can do something. I mean, I guess the thing that I want to keep arguing against, and I have to tell myself this, as frustrating as it gets, it is still important to be doing little things, okay? And someone asked me, well, Howard, what gives you any hope? Because you are a very, depressing person. I mean, you come in and you tell us all of this terrible stuff. And so let me leave you with what I fundamentally believe is the hope part. And this is going to sound real trite, but I still think that there is a basic goodness, if I can use that term, that characterizes a significant percentage of the American people. And the reason why I say that is, if you just stop and think for a moment, the number of people who are volunteering. I mean, there are people who are coming out to that mental health complex day after day after day, doing things for people that I just marvel at. There are all of these people who are trying to feed the hungry, who are not getting money for, who are volunteering their time and their energy. There are people all over this place who are tutoring kids. I mean, there are all of these things that are going on, okay? They represent, in my opinion, the real possibility for meaningful change in American society. So the problem, to me, is not the people, but it's the leadership of the people. So that what our leadership is doing is tapping into our worst instincts instead of our best instincts, and arguing then that those are our only instincts. And what I keep seeing out here is that there are those better instincts that we've got to figure out a way to tap into. And in spite of all of the pessimism and stuff, that's the one thing that gives me hope. Okay, thank you very much.